Lisa's just arranging that, then we'll start.
Yep, we're recording.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Central Coast Local Planning Panel. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Dark and Yulin people, traditional custodians and owners of the land, and pay respect to elders past and present and the ancient culture of which they're part. My name's Jason Perica, and I am the chair of today's panel meeting, appointed by the state government. The panel also comprises Ian Arnott and Michael File, both council appointed experts, and Robert Carter, a council appointed committee member. The meeting is to be conducted today in two parts. The first part's a public meeting, which is what this meeting is, and that's for items 1.1, 2.1 and 3.1. Two of those are procedural. The substantive one related to a development application is related to 1 Ficus Avenue of Oka Beach. And then after hearing and deciding upon that matter, after hearing and deliberating on that matter, we will close a public meeting and then have an electronic meeting to consider one other procedural matter related to the operation of the panel and 2 separate DAs at 76 Tramway Road, north of Oka, and 1 CR Ollie and Street, Canton Beach. Hopefully that makes sense. Declarations of interest. I'll just ask panel members to confirm my understanding that no one has a declared conflict of interest. I don't.
I don't.
I don't.
And Arnott doesn't. And Robert Carter, no conflict.
No conflicts.
Okay. So next what I'll do, and given we've only got the one item for Ficus Avenue, I'll just go over the rules and procedures for the meeting. It'll only take a few minutes. Council staff have registered all interested parties who wish to address the panel today or listen, and this is being facilitated by an electronic Teams meeting. As you may have gathered up front, it's both being voice recorded as backup through Teams, but also live streamed both by video and voice via YouTube. After people speak to us, the panel may have questions of those registered speakers. The recording of the meeting will be uploaded on Council's website in the coming days. Next, I'll just read the speakers that I understand to be addressing us today, and the only ones I have are representing the applicant. I have Peter Horton, Matthew Barry, Craig Schulman, and Johnny Ellis Flint. Is there anyone else who believes they've registered to address us, objectors or otherwise, or wants to address us? If there are, can you just unmute yourself and let me know now, because you won't be given the luxury later on of having the last word if you haven't registered. I just want to make sure there hasn't been a hiccup in the registration process. So if anyone either has or believes they have registered or would wish to address us, just speak now and unmute yourself. No? Okay. I did notice one of those speakers was a legal representative. There is a procedure that says it's generally discouraged, but in exceptional circumstances may be allowed by the chair. I'm willing to allow that if the applicant believes it's necessary. On the basis, I think the thinking behind that is that some people may be dissuaded from addressing us, but given it's recommended for refusal and the only registered speakers are those representing the applicant, I don't think anyone else would be dissuaded from speaking. I do notice recommended for refusal, and I don't have a concern with legal representative of the applicant addressing us. I should let you know that the panel has had the benefit of, as you'd be aware, a report from council staff and attachments which have been made publicly available, documentation associated with the applications, and we've also had a briefing by council staff over 2 different days. There's also been additional information provided to the panel in response to some queries, and where that's been provided by memo and written information, that will also be uploaded on the council's website. Otherwise, it's the assessment report and the recommendation before the panel that we're considering today. We don't have any other speakers, so I won't go through the rules for that other than the applicant's representatives. You do have, as a combined total, 15 minutes if you need it. As I said, several members you've sought to list to address us. We don't really mind which order they are or how long different people speak to, but if you can avoid repetition, that would be helpful. We also might have questions of the speakers, but what we will do is wait till the end of your address to us, up to that maximum of 15 minutes, and then go through any questions that exist amongst the panel then. As mentioned, it's being voice recorded and webcast. Otherwise, there is to be no recording or filming of this meeting by any other means. No phone recordings, nothing else. Such other recording requires a prior permission of the panel, and that's neither been sought nor given. I hope that's clear. We have had a misunderstanding once before at this Central Coast Planning panel. Very importantly, there's to be no personal criticism directed at council staff, other speakers, which is unlikely in this instance, the panel or people who aren't here. Be aware this is a public meeting and you're responsible for any comments you make. We won't take responsibility for them and they shouldn't be slanderous. Please don't seek to denigrate others in an attempt to win a perceived argument. It's also not a question and answer session, so any questions put to the panel will be taken as rhetorical and reflecting an issue of concern, as opposed to a question the panel will answer. Similarly, it's not a town hall debate, so please don't interject others. Again, as we've got speakers for the applicant only, it's unlikely. After the address is ended and we ask questions, that's the end of the address. And we ask that courtesy and respect be shown through the meeting, which I'm sure will be the case. People are entitled to different views and those views should be respected even if disagreed with. As mentioned, after hearing from those speaking to us and any questions from the panel, we will exhaust that process and then the panel meeting will close in order to deliberate on this item and make a decision. We won't be reconvening to relay that decision today. We will take the time we need to do that and then we will form our decision and our reasons and they will be published on Council's website, usually within a couple of days, couple of business days of the meeting. The decision on the reasons and the audio recording of the meeting will be available as soon as practicable. Decisions of the panel are by majority vote, with the chair having a casting vote if needed. Nearly there. The application is only one for this public meeting, will either be approved, refused or deferred. It's possible the panel may have a different position or make a different decision than recommended by council staff. If the matter is deferred, it's also possible the panel may subsequently determine the application by electronic means without another public meeting. So I would now, hopefully that's all clear, I'd now ask in whatever orders desired amongst Peter Horton, Matthew Barry, Craig Shulman and Johnny Ellis-Flint to address the panel.
Hi all, I'm Johnny Ellis-Flint. I'm the landscape architect on the project. I'm just going to speak really briefly. You'll hear a couple of references and you'll be aware in Council's report there were references to landscaping and fencing on the project. The landscaping is sort of exclusively grasses and forbs, native and endemic species that were based off a list that was provided by Council's ecologist. And the fencing is a form of beach stabilization kind of fencing. We put forward an example photo as a wattle and wire sand fence. It's meant to be very soft in keeping with the beach character and quite permeable, but still there to stop erosion possibly and rabbit.
Thank you. Was that a lead into someone else to address us?
Sorry, that was. I'm all done.
Okay, so it's Peter Horton here. I'll be the next speaker, I presume. So if you don't mind, I might share my screen. Is that possible with you guys? You're okay with that?
I'm okay with it, I think.
Yep. It just would be helpful to have an aerial photo. So
yeah.
Can you see an aerial photo?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So see my notes. So you can see the subject property with a red outline here. It's the lagoon boundary is a right line. It's not a mean high watermark boundary here. It's actually a right line. So it's not related to mean high watermark in any way. The yellow shows the proposed development outline. The solid is the main dwelling and the dashed is a terrace. Okay, so now the sand vegetation interface here at the pink arrow has been a point of much discussion with council and much discussion in the council report. Council appears to be pushing for a greater dwelling setback from this sand vegetation interface, but I'd argue that this interface has no statutory basis as a setback reference. The established building lines, which I'll just show on the screen now, if I just draw along here, that's the established building line along this strip. That would be a more relevant consideration, as well as the property boundary out further. So, and Craig, our planner, will be speaking about that, far more eloquently than me. So, the property boundary is about 25 metres north of the sand vegetation interface, and Council were initially telling us that the sand vegetation interface formed the edge of waterfront land, so a controlled activity approval may be required under the Water Management Act. Now, in a report of mine dated 16th of July 2024, which you've hopefully glanced at, that suggestion was dismissed, and the Department of Planning and Environment Water has reviewed what I wrote and concurred with it, with no controlled activity approval required. Now, there are a whole bunch of lines on your screen. They represent the southern extent of the bed of the estuary as defined under the Water Management Act. And the median position of those lines is actually around where my cursor is now, around the cyan line, the 2011 line. That would be approximately the median position of that boundary. So under the Water Management Act, that median position is about 40 metres north of the sand vegetation interface and around 15 metres north of the boundary. And it is this position that defines the landward edge of waterfront land in relation to the Water Management Act. Now, Council calls the sand vegetation interface the edge of the lake, but that position, based on proper analysis, is about 40 metres further north from a statutory perspective. Now, the sand vegetation interface is not a natural curvature, as Council calls it, but is related to anthropogenic factors. Council has a policy of opening the lagoon centrally, where I'm shaking now my cursor. That's where it should be opened, but it's had a tendency of opening further south, and that more southern opening has caused far more fluctuation in this area due to that mechanically influenced effect. Also, the fact that people and dogs walk along this area unlawfully, it's walking over private land, public access over private land, has also meant that vegetation cannot establish in this area. But if you actually look at an earlier aerial photo, which I'll just bring up now, so this is 2011, vegetation can grow all the way to the boundary if allowed to do so. So trampling by people and dogs using the private land at the site for unlawful public access further prevents any additional northern propagation of vegetation. If this trampling did not occur, the sand vegetation interface would be further north. This unlawful public access leads to my final comment. Council has invoked clauses 2.10 and 11 of State Environmental Planning Policy Resilience and Hazards as reasons to refuse consent. Council has claimed that the proposed development restricts public access to the foreshore. In my understanding, this cannot be used to refuse consent when the only access potentially being interfered with is unlawful public access to private land. Such a view conflicts with other parts of Council's report, where compliance with these clauses has been stated as being achieved. So in summary, the sand vegetation interface is not considered to be a relevant consideration for the dwelling setback for the lagoon. Waterfront land is located around 40 metres north of this interface, and the property boundary is 25 metres north. Council almost seemingly wants to stop this development as it does not want to upset the public who unlawfully access the private land. If that is the main issue, why not approve the dwelling development, which, as Craig will say, complies with the relevant planning controls, and simply remove the vegetation planning from the approval, which may not require development consent anyhow. That stated, the idea of vegetation planting on private land precluding an LPP giving consent seems quite weird to me. So that's it from me.
Thank you. And who's going next?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got nothing to add. Peter has covered it off from my perspective.
Right.
So Craig, over to you.
Yeah, over to me. So I'm Craig Schulman, the town planner, working on this project from Myriad Consulting, and just want to say good afternoon, Mr. Chairperson and members of the panel. Thanks for the opportunity. What we wanted to do here is just highlight some, some key points that demonstrate the proposal's compliance with the planning controls, its suitability and consistency with the locality, and some of the inconsistencies in the application of the planning controls along Ficus Avenue, or more specifically the rear setback. As Peter mentioned, the main I guess, concern of ours or that council has raised is using the natural curvature of the lake, or in this case, more specifically, the grass verge along the edge of the rear of the properties. From what we understand and have found, it's not an established principle for determining rear setbacks, where the lake's edge and related dunes and landscaping is highly dynamic and influenced by seasonal changes, rainfall, lagoon openings, and again, as Peter has said, and making this a very inconsistent regulatory measure. The rear setbacks are usually appropriately determined by the fixed property boundaries as defined in the surveys and planning controls, and which we've utilised and addressed in our proposal. I wanted to talk about just some of the issues around the proposed setbacks and the development patterns, and I was wondering if I could share my screen as well, if possible.
Yeah, I'm happy with the screen sharing. Visuals always help.
Just trying to find, is there?
At the top of your screen, there should be a share button. If you just click on that.
Yeah, I'm not, oh, there it is, sorry.
You're right.
Maybe it might be under more.
Yeah, no, I've got that. So hopefully you're seeing just a
Yep,
PDF.
got that.
So what we wanted to do is highlight here, this one here where the cursor's over, that was an approval from 2016 at number 7 Ficus Avenue. That's showing the rear building alignment, which aligns up with number 9, which is that residential block of units. And that's, again, going back a number of years, highlighting that established rear setback. The one to the right is a recent approval from 2021 for number 13 Ficus Avenue. It's harder to see, we don't have a lot of context here, but that's lining up with the previous dwelling at number 11. And again, if you infer that line through, it lines up with number 7 and number 9. Down here is an extract from the assessment report that was a refusal at 11 Ficus Avenue. In this report, the proposal was pushing out further, and in council's assessment report, they showed an established rear boundary line in this darker blue colour as the rear main building setback, where the balconies or verandas were pushing out to that lighter blue line. In our one, we have adopted the same rear setback line, which is, again, this is on the bottom right-hand side, saying that there, in council's report for 11 Ficus showed an established line. We've adopted the same line, and again, going back to having to adopt the setback to a curvature in the grass verge highly hinders the development potential for this site, and is, I guess, there's no statutory requirements for that to be enforced. What we also wanted to talk about, there was issues raised from council around the setback along the eastern side boundary. We believe that this dwelling is appropriately set back from the adjacent public reserve and maintains open space and accessibility as well as visual amenity. Council acknowledged the setback as reasonable in their report and affirming compliance with the planning expectations. In council's issues, they raised the clause 2.1.31E, which addresses, which is a control that relates to setting back of buildings from land that adjoins a recreational area, and that also adjoins, which then adjoins a waterway. In this instance, we don't believe that this control is applicable due to the nature of how the zoning maps work. That was put, there was a map, and I didn't include it here, but there was one in the later correspondence that we showed just how the zoning lines work, where it's not a very neat and consistent interface. So again, we believe we have complied with all the necessary controls and setbacks relating to that eastern side, as well as the northern rear setback. An issue that was raised in the council's assessment report also relates to some view loss. In that regard, the images used in the assessment report focus on a side view over the mid portion of 1 Ficus Avenue rather than their primary view lines, which is quite an expansive rear view over the lagoon. as well as a large portion of the beach. Again, there was an image included in that late correspondence. The images also fail to depict the full the images used are based off some hand-drawn, I guess, images, which are no ways to scale, and we are not aware that those are accurate or actually present the true impact of that, and we were not given an opportunity to respond to these during the assessment process. And overall, we have put together an application that complies with all the relevant planning controls in relation to height, site coverage, setbacks, private open space. It utilizes the established rear setbacks and is not an overdevelopment for the site, nor does it present excessive bulk or scale along Ficus Avenue or along that beach and lagoon frontage. And we respectfully urge the panel to reconsider the recommended refusal and approve this application. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. I'll just double check in. Does Matthew Barry here? Does he want to address us? I hope we weren't put off by my first comments. I was just going through what the procedure is. That's all.
No.
Still got a couple of minutes left. If you want to add anything.
Matt came on earlier just after me and said he didn't want to add anything.
Okay,
after
no worries.
Yeah, that was Matt. Yeah.
No problem. So are you finished what you'd like to say to us? Thanks. That was pretty close to 15 minutes. So well done with your timing. I might pass over to panel members for any questions in whatever order they'd like. Michael Fowle put his hand up first. Go, Mr. Fowle.
I guess we've talked a lot about the rules and the DCP and all that stuff, but you've probably got the same report we've got, but on page 44, there's an image which I think comes out of your engineer's report, a coastal engineer's report, which is probably Peter's report, I guess, Peter Horton's report. I can share it if you want, but I mean, it shows waves crashing into the ground floor, which I understand was approved originally as a garage, but now it's been fitted out like for habitable space. But that image shows waves sort of crashing into the building. So I just kind of think, like, we haven't talked much about that kind of issue about sort of, you know, sea level rise, coastal hazards and whatever, but it seems to me that, like, that's a pretty extreme image, you know?
Yeah, well, that's why the building. Yeah, that's why the building has been designed to resist the forces. So it's an acceptably low risk, it's far lower risk than the dwellings adjacent to it, which aren't designed to resist those forces, or the existing dwelling. So yeah, the dwelling is elevated compared to its current floor level, so eliminates the issue of inundation. And it's also going to be designed appropriately to resist the forces. And that's feasible from a coastal engineering and structural engineering perspective. So they're issues that we've dealt with in the application.
Yeah, and can I add that that's obviously that's the rear of the property, and that has been, as Peter said, elevated up above the levels. We've had the engineers, the stormwater.
It's elevated above it's elevated above the ground floor level of the existing building, but not the habitable floor level, which is the second level, from what I understand.
The lowest level in the dwelling is above the probable max, or the flood planning level. In fact, I think it might even be above the PMF. So, and probable maximum flood, and that's more than adequate to deal with the wave run up or wave overtopping issue. Wave overtopping in that event, and always, is not a very deep flow. It's a very fast, shallow flow. So it essentially that's more than adequate to deal with the inundation issue, the floor level we have. And the forces themselves on the building can be managed by using reinforced concrete and things like that as required, and designing for those forces.
Is that common?
I don't think it is above the PMF.
Yeah. So is it common? Yes. I mean, look, having designed many structures on the coast, yes, we design for wave forces routinely. It's very hard to deal with in a masonry structure that's existing. It's very hard to retrofit to withstand the forces, but if you're designing a reinforced concrete structure with adequate concrete thickness and reinforcement, that's not a problem at all. It's quite routine, really, to design for those forces.
Okay.
I think it's probably good to stick to one issue at a time, whoever brings it up, so we can exhaust that issue and move on to a new one. So just so I'm clear, because I think Michael Fowle was asking from the panel was asking the question of the relative levels of the proposed versus existing. So if My understanding is the same, that the lowest level is not approved to be habitable, despite that photo, or it appears to be. But the floor above is, and that floor, existing ground floor of the dwelling, is higher than your proposed level. Setting aside the arguments about building for the horses, you know, in an engineering sense, and building above the flood level with another 300 or 210, I think you've added. Just trying to work out that sort of comparison of approved existing habitable space versus proposed.
There's an image. There's one of the sections. It's on page 66, but most of it's been blacked out. I don't know if you've got access to plans but you can see it doesn't show a comparison, but it certainly shows the elevated
I've
levels.
seen that. Yeah.
So yeah, there's nothing below. Like at the moment, the house is within those at the ground level, and it gets inundated. And yeah, the proposal is addressed or looked at all the levels, looked at the flooding and the inundation, and been designed to, I guess, be above those levels and withstand the forces.
I think the question is, though, the original approval, at least in part, has garages on the ground floor. And there's sometimes since then it's been retrofitted for like habitable space on the ground floor. But
are you talking about the existing? Sorry.
The proposed is suspended above ground. There is no ground floor on natural ground. The only part of the dwelling on natural ground is the garage, which is actually raised compared to its current position. It slopes up from the street, but the rest of the dwelling is well and truly suspended above natural ground, which is part of the reason why the wave forces or the wave inundation doesn't impact on it, because it's basically underneath the slab of the first floor or the elevator floor.
Are you talking existing or proposed?
Talking about proposed.
Oh, okay, proposed. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And no, the existing, yeah, we can't really talk to the existing. It's quite clearly gets impacted with those events.
Well, part of the reason we're doing the proposed development is to reduce the risks that currently exist. It's a good thing.
Right.
If I go back to one of the original earlier schemes, we had there was a solid, I guess, seawall that was proposed along that eastern boundary, which I guess had some concerns from council as being too big and bold. But that was the intention. That was designed to deflect the waves and protect that house and other ones. But it's been scaled back to a bit more of a lower scale, just to keep in consistency with the council's requirements.
So on this issue, because it's obviously a key issue, Peter, and that's why your expertise has been brought in. But like Michael, when I saw that image, it wasn't that long ago, it was 22, I think, it made me concerned, and probably one of the few old enough people who was old enough to remember the 74 East Coast low.
Yep.
And look, I don't know, just talk me through the levels. Like we've got a 1% AEP at 2.99 or whatever it is, 500 freeboard above that takes 3.49. I think you've adopted 3.7, 210 above that, you know, wave action and different assumptions, but that's also based, I thought I'd read somewhere an assumption about a 0.3 potential sea level rise over a certain number of decades, but I don't know, there's part of me that thinks, gee, it's a pretty exposed site. I mean, that photo, you know, it's facing north, so if you get an east coast low, it's going to, I get that it'll be a fair way from the coast, but you said it'll be shallow. So is that on the basis that you wouldn't expect, if there's a combined east coast low, heavy downpour, spring tide, flooding event, then those winds in an east coast low can whip things up a fair bit. Are you saying it's shallow because of the distance that the waves from the ocean wouldn't make it that far, and it's just the lake waters that we're talking about?
So yeah, when waves reach a foreshore or reach land, they can't sustain significant depths because they've got nothing holding that water up. It's not channelized. So yeah, that's exactly what happened in 2022. It probably flowed at less than half a metre depth. Very, very fast velocity. So there is no way in QE it's going to be flowing at, you know, more than a metre and a half depth, whatever, to reach that floor level. That's just not going to happen. We're dealing with an existing risk, and actually you're eliminating that risk. And no other dwellings along that section have addressed that risk. So
you're eliminating
that's
the
where
risk
I think
based on the assumptions.
Yeah, I just don't have a problem with that statement a little bit, but because if we're talking about the garage of the existing dwelling and the actual habitable level being the first floor, it seems to me we're actually lowering the floor level with this new development.
I don't understand.
Well,
the lowest level of the dwelling is lower than your proposed habitable space, but the approved habitable level of the existing dwelling is higher, setting aside the engineering matters about wave action and walls getting knocked over. Just in terms of relative, that's the point I think Michael's making, isn't it?
I've been doing this for 30 odd years, and I'm more than comfortable that this dwelling will be designed to be acceptably low risk. I will not lose any sleep at night if an East Coast low comes through. That's the least of our problems. It's the existing development all over the Central Coast. It's not designed to resist wave action. That would be a much greater concern. Wouldn't lose any sleep over this whatsoever. It's quite achievable and feasible to design this structure, and it's well elevated, and it's properly designed to withstand the forces. Now, I wanted a side fence that would resist wave action because I thought that would benefit the entire community of Ficus Avenue heading west, but I knew it wasn't going to be a fight that was worth fighting with council. It would have been seen as too contentious, so we withdrew that part of the application. But we were offering a benefit to the community there in the end, but we decided not to pursue it. So the dwelling would be designed to resist the forces.
And why is the risk of flooding and other properties not being properly built or more of a risk for you? Is that because houses might be floating down the river and bang into you with? What did you mean by that?
Oh, those properties immediately to the west would be too old to have been designed for any consideration of coastal engineering issues, and that they haven't got elevated floor levels, so they would be severely inundated by flooding. That's probably the first thing that would happen. And
debris might cause an issue for this property.
Waves coming through, potentially taking out walls potentially.
Can I just pick up on something there, if possible?
Sure.
You said that they've got lower floor levels. The one immediately to the west of the subject site, my understanding is that the proposed floor level is relatively, generally equates to the floor level of that. Is that your understanding?
Look, I can just remember looking on site and not seeing an elevated floor level there. I thought, I mean, that's what I'm basing on.
If you look at those photos on page 44, it's showing that adjoining property, and I thought I saw that it was the proposed floor level of yours generally equates to the floor level of that property.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. I'm just looking at that photo now. All right. No, I don't think so. I think it'd be lower. That looks like it's only barely elevated above the ground. Either way, that structure would not have been designed to resist the forces that we're talking about. But look, I can't control what other applicants are doing for their properties. I'm simply saying that all I can put forward to you is this property would be acceptably designed to resist these forces. I was completely open about the risks, which why I put it in the report. I mean, not many people are aware of this issue. It's like this is and I put it in to say we are considering it, and obviously I wanted to inform the owner about it because I wanted to make sure they were clear that we needed to design for that risk. We don't want that, being adversely affected by it. So, and look, as part of the assessment process, I don't think this has ever been raised as an issue, as a concern of the council staff. They haven't been concerned about this being a significant issue, as far as I'm aware. Hasn't been raised previously in this application.
And talk me through the levels that you've got. So the 3.49, if that's the flood planning level, 500 freeboard above the 1%, and then I think you've got another 210 on a 3.7. Yep. So yep. Arriving at that, accounting for climate change impacts and wave action, and potentially applying a precautionary approach to a site that seems exposed to hazard. Why is that the number you lose no sleep over? Why shouldn't there be a bit more, latitude placed to some of these assumptions, which are only assumptions and things are dynamic over time? So
over about a 60-year life, which we have to adopt a life somewhere. We're not adopting a 1,000-year life with this dwelling. So a 60-year life, the kind of sea level rise we may expect is about 0.5 metre in that order. On a really doomsday scenario, getting up towards a metre, but that's requires us basically to keep building coal-fired power stations, and it's right at the extreme limit. So designing for a reasonable sea level rise And that full quantum of sea level rise is not seen in the wave run-up depth. It doesn't fully come over, and then whatever the sea level rise is, say 0.5 metre, that doesn't mean your depth of water increases by 0.5 metre. It still folds over the foreshore and travels at shallow depth either way. So there's more than enough freeboard above the ground, natural ground level, for it to resist, to have enough depth above that to accommodate that process. We've designed for an adequate sea level. I think the bigger issue actually for inundation of the floor is probably the catchment flooding, because that's a more likely scenario, and we've designed that by being above the probable maximum flood and being more than 500 above the 1% AEP flood level. So
just on that point, the probable maximum flood, I thought it was at 4 metres.
Sorry, okay. So we're designed to be above the flood planning level. Sorry, I changed that.
It's about 35 centimetres, 40 centimetres below.
PMF's, I think 4.06 or something. I think you're 3.7.
Yeah. But we would design the building to resist the forces of a PMF, in other words. So that's what I was, So
I think you are also slightly lower than the veranda on the next door property. There at 3.82. Your veranda's at 3.65, I think.
Right. Can we just put this stuff moving on to other issues other than the depth? Any more questions from the panel about wave inundation assumptions depth? Okay, other questions? We might go through them. Maybe can you pull up that image? I thought it was a good one with the different coloured lines on it, but mainly because it's good to have an aerial.
Yep.
So this whole question of the sand, is the sand there because people trample on it, or is the sand there because the brackish water kills the grass? I assume the latter, but you're saying the reason it's sandy at that interface is because people and dogs are trampling all over the place, and it's not I just assumed it was because the water rises a bit every few years, and the salt will kill the grass. But
also it's physical movement of water in that area as well. When there's breakout events that open too far south, and then in that 2022 event which brought all that water, or the waves in, that actually brought a whole bunch of sand in, and so there was actually no grass in the backyard virtually after that event. So the sand vegetation interface formed after 2022 was actually where the owner managed to get the sand off the grass, and they formed that interface there. It was just a manually formed interface. So
is the answer, is the variable that affects that sandy bit and the line between that and the grass more the water movement or more people trampling on it?
Oh, look, it's a mixture of the two. I think it's a lagoon breakout process changing the dynamic there, and also. Okay. But look, even if that wasn't occurring, if people are walking in an area,
it's not going to help.
It's very hard to establish vegetation. So
right. And just talk me through the S-bend. Is there any, like, as far as you're aware, I mean, it all looks pretty sandy and dune-like, but is there an S sort of off the northern part of that opening we're looking at? Is there an underlying rock that's sort of pushing it? Because it does seem to curve a bit, or it's just where they tractor out the sand or make the water go.
That's a different date. That's it changes all the time. But that's the issue. If you do a more central opening, it tends to meander less. I think my concern is tend to be opened further south, so it meanders more and it's more out of control.
Right.
So I think it's council's own policy says open it in the centre. I don't think that they're really complying with that. So.
Yeah, right. So that the water doesn't gouge out when it comes around the corner, which is what it's potentially doing to you.
That image you see now is after that 2022 event. So you can see that's where all the sand actually deposited on this site. So that's another way to kill vegetation, is smother it with sand or erode it with sand. Either way, vegetation can't establish. So.
And the rabbit-proof fence thing, apart from the terminology of it, what is it? Because I thought I saw two images, one with vertical wooden stakes almost, and another with the sort of post and wire with what looked to be a open mesh. So what is it?
We offered some examples. The idea was that the fencing for the majority of the site was kind of akin to the fencing you see around dune revegetation work, something very in keeping with the informal beach character of all the properties around here. Post and rope fence would look lovely. It just wouldn't keep out any rabbits, which we know are a big problem in Avoca. You just can't establish any of the kind of nice native vegetation that you'd want to see in this sandy kind of environment here.
Is that right? Rabbits right down here next to the beach and in
Oh,
salty
huge
conditions?
issue. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
They're everywhere. Go out on a
Right, but-
either early in the morning or in the afternoon, and there's probably like 50 rabbits just around you all the time.
But apart
It's
from
quite
the
funny.
rabbits, I'd assume there was some desire to create some demarcation between the point you raise about private and public land, so that would also demarcate where people couldn't walk.
Correct. Well, it was, exactly. If we could plant some vegetation to a reasonable extent, which is what we think we're doing, and not have people trample all over it, then maybe we wouldn't need the fence.
But is that on the other side of the fence as well? Because I thought I saw a landscape strip on the water side of the fence. And what depth is that, and what's that? So
we did. We offered. We indicated that there might be a sort of buffer of 1.5 meters of planting just on the other side of the fence.
Okay, more questions.
Very happy to remove that.
More questions from the panel about S-bends and fences and rabbits? Anyone want to put those follow-up questions to those?
Well, no,
Robert.
not to the current discussion, but I've got some a new kind of point just to raise, if that's
sure.
Ready?
Go ahead.
So obviously from a community basis, as I said on the panel today. So I would say one of the disadvantages, unfortunately, for this block of land is its location, given that it's exposed to adjacent to a park, a public park area, which is widely used throughout summer and in fact all year round, but certainly as you expect in summer, and the pine tree that's there. So the concern from a community basis is the size of this new development, because it will overshadow quite a lot of that natural area. Sitting around there, having picnics and so forth, looking back to the lagoon will be taken away, and just the physical size of this development, as it's currently shown, will have quite a large impact on that park and that public community area. So, from my perspective, taking away all the other concerns raised in water and levels and so forth, the actual size of this development and its location poses an impact to the community.
So a question or a statement, Robert? Are you happy that you want to answer that?
That's a statement, really, more than anything.
Okay. Other questions from the panel? Ian, Michael? No.
Nothing from me.
Just on the views, I guess you made the point that it was raised as a concern, probably directed to you, Craig. I'd say, Craig Shawman. You made the points about it being across outside boundary. Primary views to water and beach will remain, but have you, and not being given the opportunity to do the modelling, which I guess you could have done by getting the objections and photos, or doing your own, but again subject to access for the neighbour. I would have thought the view impacts to the more directly east to the waves would also be highly valued. But have you done view modelling since, or are you intending to, or you just stand by the principles at the side boundary and you've still got a fair bit of view in other directions?
We only got the assessment report was late last week, there was no view issues were raised during the assessment of this. It's mainly been the setbacks and we might get through it. But so when we saw that, it was, I guess, looked at it going, well, firstly, it wasn't raised, so we hadn't had the time to prepare for it, but then also look at the accuracy of what was being done. So I'm just looking at the image on the screen, because we don't know where those images were taken from, the levels that they've used. And I mean, we would certainly like the opportunity to address that, and it's certainly something that we can do, but having not given the opportunity, the only thing we can say is that there's still significant view lines, expansive views from the rear of that property, which still captures the beaches, the waves, the lagoon, and everything else in between.
Right. But trying to get, and I'm not trying to fence you into anything here, it's just a discussion, but a few of us probably been on panels for a while, and you see reports for refusals, and some refusals are harder or more difficult than others. This didn't seem a particularly difficult one in that the key issues that seem to be raised, at least from the council staff's point of view, we're the one making the decision, but were eastern setback being okay, even though the non-compliance is there. Key issue with the rear setback, combination of character, coastal issues and arguments about predominant rear setback, but not of great significance, and opening up the side boundary because of to a deck, but otherwise some tinkering with the rear setback, some opening up of a deck, and so it's your position that it's just all, the balance of planning considerations are just wrong. What you put forward is reasonable, or what's your thoughts now, having read the report, about the way forward for yourselves?
I think you kind of put it there. We feel and believe that what has been designed, there was quite a bit of preliminary work on this to make sure that we met all those controls. But when the issue around using the rear setback of that, utilizing the curvature, obviously that was something that was obviously not very beneficial for this site, considering that when you look at that curvature that's on the screen now, it takes away almost half the site compared to the other one. So having to adopt that, it didn't seem like a consistent approach. We did set back some elements. There was a fire pit and some other seating and veranda that was out there. So we have made some concessions to address that, and again, it's come out that besides that,
okay. I figured that you've got four people here to argue your case. What you've put forward, you think is reasonable, and the balance of considerations of the council report you think is unfavourable and not backed by your own views, at least.
No, and then just going back to Mr. Carter's comments just about the reserve, there has been some consideration around that, and the use of that reserve is not going to be restricted or impacted. There will be some additional overshadowing, but not due to any excessive bulk. There has been articulation that's put in there, so it steps back. There's a whole lot of materials, and it was certainly recognised and identified that it is a highly utilised place for the public, and we don't believe, except for some additional overshadowing, which is mostly in midday at winter, is not going to impact the use of that for the public.
Okay, thank you. Just thought I'd ask, but that's sort of what I thought the position might be.
Yeah.
So I just checked with the panel. Any last questions before we wrap this up? No.
Nope.
Okay. And then similarly, I'll just give the applicant if anyone in amongst your group has sort of heard questions or heard comments and wants to raise something that hasn't been raised yet, I'll give you a last chance. Otherwise, I'll call this to a close.
Nothing further for me.
Okay, no one else has unmuted themselves. Okay, look, thanks for that. Thanks for giving us your time and talking through that. I think some of those visuals helped. And so what we will do now is close this part of the public meeting. As I mentioned up front, you may or may not have caught, we will then deliberate for as long as it takes to come to a majority decision as needed. And then we will publish the decision and the reasons for that decision in the coming days as soon as practicable, but we won't be reconvening today to relay that decision. So there's no real point waiting around. But thanks for attending. Hope that all makes sense, and then you'll see our decision as soon as we publish in the coming days. Thank you. I'll declare this public. Thank you. I'll declare this public part of the meeting closed at 2:49. Thanks, panel. We've got a separate deliberation to go to.
Right,
Good afternoon, everyone. All right.
Good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.